At 24, Ren Callahan had $340, a duffel bag, and a 19-year-old sister asleep against the passenger window. They had been living out of a Honda for 6 weeks. So when the county auction listed a collapsing 3-story farmhouse on Tideline Road for back taxes, Ren raised her hand for a number nobody else wanted to say out loud. $300. Everyone in the room laughed, low and quick, the way people laugh at something they think is already dead. But 3 nights later, when Ren pried up a swollen floorboard under the parlor window seat looking for a leak, she found a tin box sealed in wax paper, and inside it, a name that wasn't hers. Their mother had been gone 11 months when the landlord sold the building out from under the tenants and gave everyone 30 days. Ren remembered the exact shape of that letter. The way the paper had curled slightly at the corner where someone's coffee cup had sat too long during printing, as if even the eviction notice hadn't been important enough to handle carefully. She remembered folding it twice and putting it in her coat pocket instead of throwing it away, because some part of her wanted proof, later, that it had actually happened this way, that a woman could work 2 jobs for 15 years and still end up owing somebody else for the privilege of having lived. Iris took it harder, or at least louder. She was 19 and had inherited their mother's habit of narrating catastrophe as it happened, like a woman describing a storm to someone on the phone. "This is insane," she'd said, watching movers who weren't theirs carry a stranger's couch up the same stairwell their mother used to climb with grocery bags looped over both wrists. "This is actually insane, Ren." Ren hadn't argued. She had learned, in the last year, that agreeing with Iris quickly was the fastest way through a bad hour. They'd tried a shelter first, the kind with a curfew and a check-in sheet, and a woman at the desk who called everyone hon in a voice that had run out of surprise a long time ago. 2 weeks in, a bedbug outbreak closed half the building, and they went back to the car, which at least smelled like nothing but old coffee and the pine tree air freshener Iris kept buying even though it never worked. Ren got day labor shifts at a fish packing plant off the county road, standing 8 hours in rubber boots that were a size too big, coming home smelling like brine and bleach. Iris waited tables at a diner that paid under the table and tipped badly, and cried exactly once, in the bathroom, where she thought Ren couldn't hear her through the wall. It was Dot Pruitt, the woman who ran Pruitt's General a half-mile past the harbor, who mentioned the auction. Ren had come in for gas station coffee and a granola bar, paying in change she'd counted twice, and Dot had looked at her the way older women in small towns look at girls they've decided need looking after, whether the girls want it or not. "County's auctioning off the Bellwood place Thursday," Dot said, sliding the change back across the counter without being asked. "Back taxes. Nobody's touched it in 15 years. You'd have to be desperate or crazy to bid on it." Ren had said nothing, because she was, at that point, both. The house sat at the crooked bend of Tideline Road, where the asphalt buckled from decades of frost heave and nobody had bothered to repave it, because nothing out there was worth the trouble anymore. 3 stories. A wraparound porch that sagged on the north side like a shoulder held too long in one position. A roof line that leaned 2 degrees off true in a way you could see if you stood at the mailbox and squinted. Locals called it the Crooked House, the way you'd name a dog after its limp. Not cruel, just accurate. Nobody remembered exactly who Bellwood had been. "A carpenter," someone said. "Built the whole thing with his own hands sometime after the war and lived there alone until he didn't live anywhere anymore." At the auction, held in a beige room at the county annex with folding chairs and a coffee urn nobody refilled, the county clerk read out the parcel number and the back tax total in a voice that suggested she'd read 100 parcel numbers that week, and this one wasn't special. $300 was the opening bid. Nobody moved. A man in the back row who smelled like cigarettes said, "That place'll fall down before you finish signing," loud enough for the room to laugh, quick and clean, the kind of laugh that costs nothing because it isn't aimed at anyone in particular. Ren raised her hand anyway. The gavel came down before the laughter finished. Iris hadn't wanted to go inside at first. She stood at the bottom of the porch steps with her arms crossed, looking up at windows gone milky with age, and said, "It smells like something died in there," which turned out to be at least partly true. A raccoon, long departed, had made a home and then an end of itself somewhere in the second-floor wall. But the roof held. The bones of the place, when Ren finally got a flashlight into the crawlspace weeks later and looked up at the joists, were oak, hand-cut, fitted with a precision that had nothing careless in it. Whoever built this house had built it to still be standing for someone he would never meet. Inside, the rooms held their previous life the way a held breath holds air. Nothing had been cleared out. Only closed up. A pair of wire-rimmed reading glasses sat folded on a windowsill in the front room, lenses gone dull with dust. A half-finished ship model, a two-masted schooner, sat on a workbench in what must have been a den, its rigging thread frayed and gray. One mast still clamped in a vise, as if the builder had only stepped away for a minute 15 years ago and never come back. A framed photograph, tilted on a mantel, showed a man in his 60s with a squared jaw and sawdust on his forearms, standing in front of the same porch, half smiling like he'd been caught at something. Wren set her duffel bag down in the front hallway on the first night and looked at the water-stained ceiling, the peeling floral wallpaper, the dead man's reading glasses on the sill, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel about a $300 building, that it might eventually be theirs in a way that meant something. Iris curled up on a moth-eaten armchair with a blanket from the car and said, "Into the dark, if something in this house is haunted, I swear to God." Wren said nothing. She was already thinking about the floorboard that had given a half-inch under her foot near the window seat, softer than the boards around it, like it had been lifted and set back more than once. She waited 3 days before she pried it up. Partly because there was so much else to do first, boarding a broken window, running an extension cord from the one working outlet, hauling out 2 decades of mouse nests from the pantry, and partly because some instinct told her that whatever was under that board deserved more than a tired woman's flashlight at midnight. When she finally knelt down with a crowbar on a gray Tuesday afternoon while Iris was at the diner, the board came up cleaner than it should have for its age, like it had been designed to be lifted. Underneath, set into the joist itself, was a tin box wrapped twice in wax paper, tied with kitchen string gone brittle and pale. Inside the tin, on top of a bundle of yellowed letters, was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds, and on the outside of the fold, in a carpenter's careful, blocky handwriting, was written a name. Not Wren's name. Not anyone she recognized. A name that meant nothing to her at all, and everything she would later understand to the story of how she'd ended up kneeling on this floor in the first place. She didn't open it that afternoon. She sat with the tin in her lap for a long time, listening to the house settle around her the way old houses do, joints and studs adjusting to weight the way an old man's knees adjust to standing, and thought about the fact that somebody had hidden this on purpose, sealed it against damp and time, and then never come back for it. Whoever he was, he had run out of chances to explain himself. Wren wrapped the tin back in its wax paper, set it on the kitchen table where Iris would see it, and went to go find her sister. Dot Pruitt was the one who filled in what the county records couldn't. She showed up 2 days later unannounced, in a truck that had seen better decades, with a casserole dish balanced on the passenger seat, and a look on her face like she'd been waiting 15 years for someone to finally ask the right question. "Augustus Bellwood," she said, standing in the ruined kitchen with her arms crossed against the cold that still came through the walls. Everybody called him Gus. Built half the houses on this side of the harbor with his own 2 hands, back when a man could still do that and make a living at it. She looked at the ship model on the workbench through the doorway, and something in her face softened. Never married. No children that anyone knew of. Just him and this house and that boat he never finished. Dot had known him the way small towns know their quiet men, from a distance, mostly, filled in by rumor and the occasional kindness nobody talked about directly. Gus had fixed roofs for widows and never sent a bill. He'd hired teenagers nobody else would hire and taught them a trade instead of a lecture. He'd died alone on a Tuesday in November. And the town had shown up for his funeral in numbers that surprised even the people who liked him, because it turned out a lot of people had a story about something he'd done for them that they'd never told anyone. Nobody ever figured out where his money went, Dot said. He didn't have much on paper. Folks always figured that was just Gus, didn't hold on to things. Wasn't the type. She looked at the floorboard, still leaned against the wall where Wren had set it. Guess maybe he held on to more than folks thought. Word got around the way it does in a town small enough that everyone's cousin works at the hardware store. Within a week, a retired fisherman named Hollis showed up with a truckload of split firewood and didn't wait to be thanked. A woman named Marjorie from 2 roads over left a box of canning jars and vegetables on the porch with a note that just said welcome. Iris, who had spent the last year and a half assuming the world contained mostly landlords and bad tips, stood on the porch one evening watching a teenage boy from down the road unload a wheelbarrow of gravel for the driveway, unasked, and said quietly, I don't understand what's happening. Wren didn't fully understand it either. But she understood that it had something to do with a dead carpenter and a debt the town seemed to feel it still owed him, one they were settling now, on his behalf, through two strangers who'd bought his house for the price of a tank of gas. They opened the tin together on a Sunday, at the kitchen table, with two mismatched mugs of coffee going cold between them. The letter with the unfamiliar name on it, Wren set aside. She wasn't ready for that one yet. Underneath were a dozen more letters, thinner, in the same blocky hand, addressed to no one, dated across almost 20 years. They read like a man talking to himself. Working through arithmetic and conscience in the same breath, money set aside for someone's tuition. An amount noted next to a family name Wren didn't know. A running tally that read less like a ledger and more like a confession written in installments. At the bottom of the tin, beneath the letters, sat a folded document, official and old, a deed, not to the house they were standing in, but to 11 acres of orchard land half a mile up the ridge, held in a private trust under Gus Bellwood's name for 15 years. Waiting, it seemed, for an heir nobody had ever formally named. They spent the next 6 weeks turning the crooked house back into something that could hold a life. Iris found she had a talent for it that surprised her. She stripped 40 years of wallpaper with a heat gun and a scraper and something that looked almost like joy, and started keeping a running list of paint colors on the back of a diner receipt. Wren fixed the porch step first, out of some instinct that the house should be able to be stood on before it was anything else, then worked backward from there. The leaning roofline. The cracked chimney flue, the window seat where it had all started. Hollis came by most Saturdays with tools Gus himself might have used. Dot brought coffee and gossip and once, a box of Gus's old work shirts she'd kept in her attic for no reason she could explain, just in case. They set the ship model back on its workbench. Dusted, its unfinished rigging left exactly as it was. Because Iris said finishing it felt like erasing something that wasn't theirs to erase. They cleaned the reading glasses and set them on the mantel next to Gus's photograph, and the framed image of a house on a good day, and a small brass level Hollis said Gus had carried in his pocket for 40 years. 3 small things from a stranger, arranged like a family photo none of them had ever taken. By the end of the 6th week, the crooked house had lights that worked in every room, a porch that no longer sagged when you stood at its center, and a kitchen table where 2 sisters had started eating dinner instead of drive-through food eaten cross-legged on a car hood. Iris stood in the doorway one evening, looking at the newly steady floor under her feet, and said, "We should tell people we're staying," in the voice of someone who hadn't let herself believe it until she said it out loud. If you've stayed with Wren and Iris this far, you already know this story isn't finished being kind to them, because it isn't finished testing them either. What happens next is the part I didn't see coming when I first read about this house. And if you want to see how far it goes, now's the time to hit that subscribe button because we are only halfway there. The letter came on a Wednesday, delivered by a courier instead of the regular mail carrier, which was how Wren knew before she'd even opened it that it wasn't going to be good news. It was from a firm 2 counties over, representing a man named Mercer Holt, and it stated, in language built to sound more certain than it was, that the county auction of the Bellwood property had been improperly noticed, that Holt had submitted a prior claim on the parcel that the county had failed to process, and that he intended to challenge the sale in probate court within 30 days. Iris read it twice, standing in the kitchen in her socks, and said, "They can't just take it back. We paid for it. We have a deed." Wren didn't answer right away, because she'd learned enough in the last 2 months to know that having a deed and keeping a deed were sometimes 2 very different fights, and that fights like this one were rarely won by the people with the least money for lawyers. She folded the letter along its existing crease and set it on the counter, the same way she'd once folded an eviction notice and put it in her coat pocket, like proof of something she hoped never to need again. Mercer Holt turned out to be a name half the town knew, and none of them liked saying out loud. He'd made his money buying up waterfront parcels for a development company 2 counties south, flipping harbor views into vacation properties for people who'd never once smelled low tide. He drove a truck too clean for the roads out here and wore boots that had never touched a boat deck. When he showed up at the crooked house 4 days later, unannounced, standing at the bottom of the porch steps in a jacket that cost more than the sisters' first month's rent had, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This land's worth considerably more than $300, he said, looking past Wren at the orchard ridge in the distance, not at the house at all. I'd rather settle this quietly. Sell to me, and I make the challenge disappear. Fight me, and you'll spend money you don't have proving something a judge may not even believe. Hollis, working on the porch railing with a level in his back pocket, straightened up slowly enough to make his opinion clear without saying a word. Dot, when Wren told her that evening, went quiet in a way that wasn't like her at all and said only, "I need to check something," before driving off faster than her truck usually managed. The town, which had spent 6 weeks quietly repaying an old debt to a dead man through his 2 accidental heirs, seemed to sense that the debt was about to be called due all at once and in a much larger amount than firewood and casseroles could cover. It was Iris, going through the tin box again on a bad night when neither of them could sleep, who found the setback hiding in plain sight. A second letter tucked flat against the tin's inner lid that they'd missed the first time, dated barely a year before Gus died, referencing a survey he'd commissioned on the orchard land and never filed. Without that filing, the trust document they'd found might not hold up as cleanly as they'd assumed. "It doesn't prove anything's wrong," Wren said, reading it twice under the kitchen light, feeling the floor tilt slightly under a hope she'd let herself have too soon. "It just means we can't prove it's right yet either." For 3 days, the fixing and painting stopped. The house sat half-finished again, the way it had sat for 15 years before them, while both sisters waited to find out whether they'd bought a home or a very expensive way to lose one twice. Dot came back on the 4th day with a folder instead of a casserole. She'd gone to the county archive and pulled every record with Bellwood's name on it, going back 3 decades, and buried in a box of unfiled land surveys from a clerk who'd retired without finishing his paperwork, she'd found the missing filing, dated, signed, notarized, 13 years old, exactly matching the trust document in the tin. "Man never filed anything on time in his life," Dot said, setting the folder on the kitchen table with the particular satisfaction of someone who has just proven a stranger wrong on principle. "But he never lied about anything either. There's a difference, and today it matters." The deeper reveal came the night before the hearing, when Wren finally let herself open the letter with the unfamiliar name on it, the one she'd set aside on the very first Sunday and hadn't been able to make herself read since. The name on the fold was Elaine Marsh. It took her a moment, reading the letter inside by lamplight at the kitchen table, to understand why that name felt like it was reaching for her across 15 years. Elaine Marsh had been their mother's name before she married. Gus's letter, dated the year their mother turned 19, described a girl who'd worked one summer sweeping his shop floor for gas money, whose father had just lost the family fishing boat to a bank that didn't care whose family it was, and a debt Gus had quietly paid off in her father's name so she wouldn't have to watch her whole childhood get repossessed at once. "I never told her it was me," the letter read in that same careful, blocky hand. "Some kindnesses only work if the person never has to carry the weight of thanking you for them. I hope, if she ever has a hard year, something finds its way back to her." Wren sat with that letter for a long time, understanding for the first time that the $300 she'd raised her hand for hadn't been an accident at all, that some door in this story had been left unlocked for her specifically, 15 years before she was born into needing it. The hearing was held in the same beige county room where the auction had happened, though it felt smaller this time, crowded with people who had no formal reason to be there and had come anyway. Hollis sat in the second row in a collared shirt Wren had never seen him wear. Dot sat with her folder in her lap, like a woman guarding something precious. Mercer Holt sat across the aisle with his lawyer, checking his phone until the judge told him, not unkindly, to put it away. The county's own filing clerk, retired now, was persuaded to come speak to the survey he'd forgotten to process 13 years earlier, and did so with the mortified thoroughness of a man settling a debt of his own. The judge reviewed the trust document, the notarized survey, and the county's own auction records, and took less time than anyone expected to rule that the sale stood and the challenge did not. Mercer Holt didn't leave immediately. He stood in the hallway afterward, jacket still too clean, looking less like a man who'd lost a land deal and more like a man remembering something he'd tried hard not to. Dot found him there and said something to him quietly that Wren didn't hear, and whatever it was, it made him go still. Later, Dot told her the rest, that Holt's own father had lost his lumber mill decades earlier. The same year Gus was quietly buying gas money and repossessed boats back for other families, and that Gus, without ever saying so, had once given a 14-year-old Mercer Holt his first job stacking lumber so the boy would have something to put on a job application that wasn't his father's failure. Holt had spent 30 years turning that old shame into other people's land. He hadn't known, until that hallway, that the house he was trying to take had belonged to the one man who'd once tried to help him for nothing in return. The pay-it-forward part of the story didn't arrive with any ceremony. It arrived on a Tuesday, in the shape of a 16-year-old boy named Cody standing at the edge of the Crooked house's new gravel driveway with a backpack, and nowhere anyone had sent him from. Hollis had found him sleeping in the old boatyard shed down by the harbor and, not knowing what else to do with a runaway who wouldn't give a straight answer about his family, had driven him to the one house in town that he knew wouldn't ask too many questions before offering a meal. Iris was the one who opened the door. She looked at him for a long moment, at the exact tired posture of someone deciding whether it's safe to hope a stranger will actually help, and said, "There's a room on the second floor nobody's using yet. You can stay until you've got somewhere better, and if somewhere better doesn't happen fast, you can just stay." It was, Wren realized later, almost exactly what the town had said to them 6 months earlier without ever quite saying it out loud. Cody stayed. He learned to sand a porch rail properly, under Hollis's patient, repetitive instruction. And he stopped flinching every time someone raised their voice near him. Slowly, over a season no one rushed. He asked, once, why they'd taken him in without knowing anything about him, and Wren told him the truth, that a dead man neither of them had ever met had done the same for people he barely knew, and that it had taken her a long time to understand that some debts aren't meant to be paid back to the person who gave them. They're meant to be paid forward, to whoever shows up next needing exactly what you once needed. 6 months after the hearing, the orchard land had its first small harvest, sold at a roadside stand Iris built from salvaged porch lumber, and the money went straight into finishing the second floor for whoever needed it next. The ship model still sat unfinished on its workbench, rigging exactly as Gus had left it. Because some things are more honest left incomplete. The reading glasses stayed on the mantel. Cody had picked up the habit, without anyone teaching it to him, of dusting them every Sunday. Wren still kept the letter with her mother's maiden name on it folded in the same tin box, though she'd read it enough times now that she didn't need to unfold it to remember the words. She understood, finally, something about the house that the county records could never have told her, that a place isn't worthless just because nobody's bid on it in 15 years. Sometimes it's just been waiting, patiently, crookedly, for the right people to finally come looking.